Let me begin this part of our interview by essentially is saying that, one of the key issues for these powers like China, like Russia, is that that Afghanistan should no longer be a place from which terrorism is exported. And they have extracted. The reason they are dealing with the Taliban government is that the Taliban government has promised them that this will not happen. So can you begin from there and then comment on exactly how China and Russia in particular and the SCO are relating to the Taliban government, and where you think this relationship will go in the future?
Radhika, what you have said is the commonality. Now, the point is each of these protagonists, China, Russia, Iran, they also have specific interests in Afghanistan. And one interesting feature is, from what I have analyzed, those interests are not grating against each other. So which allows these countries, these regional states, to function together in a matrix where they have common interests, and their common interests can be effectively pursued. So you see this has given impetus to this new forum of the countries neighboring Afghanistan. The foreign ministers of these countries have already had one meeting: Pakistan,
Correct.
Iran, Turkmenistan, Uzbekistan, Tajikistan, and China. Now, the next meeting will be hosted by Iran. And now, you had the special envoys of Russia, China, and Pakistan went to Kabul and had meeting with the Taliban government leadership on Monday.
Mm-hmm.
So again, a regional process is there. So you see, Shanghai Cooperation Organization is a regional organization. So you see the withdrawal of the American troops, it has led to a regional initiative in a genuine sense. Now, what is it their interest? As I mentioned, there are specific interests. The specific interest is under this rubric of terrorism. The Russians have a serious problem with regard to North Caucasus. They mention threat to Central Asia, but they do not admit. But the situation is that they have a problem, they have a great worry. And the first government of the Taliban had actually recognized the Chechen Republic, and they had diplomatic relations with the Chechen rebel government at that time. So it was from that time that the Russians legislated the Taliban as a terrorist group, which is still in the statutes, So you see I saw some statements, literature coming out from them, the Emirate of North Caucasus. This is an umbrella organization of the radical Islamist movements of the Northern Caucasus region, Ingushetia, Chechnya, all those places together. Now they have very warmly welcomed. So you see, the Russians' worry is that, that number one, that this will radiate radical energy, and it will sooner or later reach there. And there are people from those regions in Afghanistan today working shoulder to shoulder with the Taliban, these groups, and they were part of the insurgency there, So you see, the Taliban cannot disown them also very easily. So this is a very worrying thing. A small detail is very important here, in the sense that, with the Central Asian countries, Russia has a visa-free regime. That is, if a fellow crosses the border into Central Asia, he can travel all the way into Russia, and there's no stopping him, there's no border check, nothing, And it's quite difficult to reintroduce the visa regimes and border controls and so on now at short notice like that. So the Russians want, this border control to be very strict. They want to stop the refugee flow, therefore, because the refugees will inevitably have a fair complement of radical elements, So these are specific interests. And then the stability of the Central Asian region, it is very important, because Russia is a provider of security for Central Asian region. So these factors come into it. I don't think so much that an Islamic regime in Russia feels perturbed by an Islamic regime in Afghanistan. I don't think that's the point. The security paradigm is very important for the Russians there. And then, of course, the American presence and the American intentions and all this kind of thing. They were vigilant about it. But now that has become a thing of the past, and they will only want to see that the Americans don't come back to that region there. They have no clash of interests, therefore, with the other neighboring countries. Yeah? China, when it comes to that, is more or less the same situation, China's case, because China's number one concern is about the security of Xinjiang.
Yes.
And there again, there is no clash of interest with any other country. It is their national security interest. It's not that the security interests are in jeopardy, but it's like a toothache. If this kind of people, start indulging in terrorism and so on in Xinjiang, where the situation is very calm as of now, after many years of turbulence, it worries the Chinese, therefore. Then China has an added interest in terms of Belt and Road.
Correct.
Belt and Road is a very important project for them. And this Belt and Road projects, these roads and rail links and so on, will be running through a country which is completely outside the sphere of American influence. So that is particularly fascinating for them, in terms of their so-called Malacca dilemma, where it's a choke point controlled by the Americans, where 90% of their trade is, passing through that choke point. So they can diversify links to Europe, links to Africa, links to Middle East, and so on. So that's very important. Then, they have written very candidly that they are interested in the fact that Afghanistan has vast resource of minerals,
including rare earth minerals,
rare earths, lithium and so on, which is now necessary for electric cars and chip making and all that. All that is there. It has got probably one of the biggest reserves in the world, So anywhere between $1 to $3 trillion, it's estimated to be. Now, this is actually, first survey was done by the Soviets. And during their occupation time, the Americans got hold of that survey, and the Pentagon had another task force working on it and found that it's actually the resources are much bigger than what the Russians had thought.
Had reported.
So that is why I said it's between $1 to $3 trillion. So, this is very important for the Chinese. Next door, this is coming, and this can be linked to so many other activities like investment in Afghanistan, economic development of Afghanistan, overall stabilization of Afghanistan, creating interdependency with the new regime that has come into power, goodwill, all that, stems out of this. So none of this, really speaking, is cutting the vital interests of any country. That if you want to have a geopolitical struggle against this, by all means, you go ahead. But in terms of core interests, it's not grating against anyone's interests. Iran's number one is that Iran wants a stable Afghanistan, because Iran, unlike Russia, China, Iran is a stakeholder in the stability, social stability of Afghanistan.
And it is home to millions of Afghan refugees.
Yes, there's something like about 45 million ethnic groups, that is Tajiks plus Hazaras, with whom Iran has cultural affinity. And, the language that is spoken by the Afghan elite is Dari, which is an offshoot of Persian. So this is in their sphere of influence, historically. So the cultural ties are very strong, and the affinity is very much felt in the blood, So Iran, it is very important when we all speak about inclusive government, but in my estimation, the one country and the only country in the world which really means it is Iran. That is, they want these people to be accommodated in the government. And that is very important for Iran, because it is also creates for Iran goodwill and leverage, there. Number two, border security, because cross-border terrorism is a fact of life. And Saudi supported, American supported, Israeli supported terrorist groups have operated out of that region to bleed Iran. That is another one. Then drug trafficking. It's a major problem because the drug used to flow through northern Afghanistan to Turkey to Europe. Now they want this to be stopped, and they feel that they have a congruence of interest with the Taliban on that score. So all these factors are there, and then let me not overlook this, that a stable Afghanistan gives them also much better access to China, through a rail link, for instance, which is very much in their mind, a rail link connecting Herat and Mazar-e-Sharif will take them straight into the Chinese border.
Absolutely.
So, it's very important for them, and Iran has a great desire to be part of, to be a hub, in fact, of the BRI, Belt and Road Initiative. So these are the things there.
Bhadran, your knowledge is so encyclopedic. We could talk for several more hours, but I feel that I should draw this interview to a conclusion by just one final question, and we'll probably come back to you for more as the situation evolves. So, and I'm skipping over many other questions I have, because as I said, you have answered in so fully and wonderfully. So I'm going to compress my final set of questions into just really one, which is the India-Pakistan situation, of which you are you know so much. How has the India-Pakistan relation been affected, and of course the Kashmir issue, been affected by the United States withdrawal? If you can conclude our interview with some reflections on that, that would be great.
India actually then we'll be concluding on a sad note, because personally I'm very sad about this. Having handled this desk for so many years, and having contributed to Indian policy making, I think we went wrong. We made serious mistakes. The time when I was there in the Foreign Office, the thinking was that India-Pakistan relations, I was the head, as you know, of the Pakistan division. The India-Pakistan relationship is so very complicated that we should not try to add to it, that as it is bad. And therefore, do not use, in other words, Afghanistan as a turf or a template of the India-Pakistan tensions. Now this, we made a departure in the 1990s, second half of the 1990s. And this took us to the Northern Alliance, to those tribes. When I first actually went and contacted the Mujahideen groups in Afghanistan in the early 1990s, I went through the archives. Ratika, you will not believe, we had so little material on the northern tribes of Afghanistan. I wanted to study them. Before meeting Masood and so on. I was the first Indian to meet Masood. And I was going into Panjshir at that time, incognito, without any kind of thing. We had no embassy there. And these are people who were, fed and supported by the Pakistanis. So they were not in talking terms with us. So for the first conversation when we went there, I needed to know with whom I am going to talk to. So I sifted through the archives to study, and I saw that. Why? Because India's interests, we inherited the British legacy. That is Afghanistan in terms of India's front line, Curzon's time onward, that is where the British wanted to save imperial India from British India from the Russians.
Correct.
So the buffer was Afghanistan. And there, the southern part of Afghanistan actually was where the defense line was, which materialized as the Durand line and so on.
Correct.
So, the historical flow has been only with the southern tribes. When we got involved in the northern tribes, so you can see the absurdity of it, and people who had no sense of history created this sort of distortions in the Indian policy. We had no common interest with those northern tribes, for whom the gravitational pull is always towards other regions, Central Asia, Iran, and so on. So, therefore, this became a template of India-Pakistan tensions, whereas it didn't have to be. I've been trying to tell the people here also in writings right from the beginning, all through these 20 years I've been writing on this, that we have to understand Pakistan's compulsions because the Durand Line question is not being resolved. And can you imagine any country with some 2,500 kilometers of border, which is open, where people can come and go? So they have a very acute security situation. So into that, we have created a narrative that Pakistan is trying to create strategic depth in Afghanistan and so on, and we got worked up. And so, if someone has a problem with Pakistan, we'll immediately invite him for a cup of tea. It went to this sort of mindset, a zero-sum mindset. But frankly, therefore, to come to the present day, the withdrawal of the Americans from Afghanistan is not detrimental to India's interests. I don't see it at all that way. It can be detrimental only for this reason that, that it leads to the ascendancy of Pakistan's influence in Kabul. Now, if that ascendancy is, if you are able to understand this ascendancy as something which is very natural in the flow of things, being a neighboring country with ethnic similarities, common history, culture, and so on and so forth, I don't know why we should feel upset about it, and we should think that it is detrimental to our interests. Afghans are basically very friendly towards India. And, Tagos, Kabuliwala, and, that romance, that
Absolutely.
kind of romance is still very much there.
Yep.
So, no amount of Pakistani influence in Afghanistan can erase that. And therefore, I would have actually liked an Indian policy which is constructive, positive, which is to create bridges of friendship with the people there and assist that country, because India has a certain type of developmental experience. From ground zero, we have come up to this point in a matter of 70 years, a type of experience which Western countries cannot give. So, we have a relevance there, and Afghans like it to come and, for their capacity building, to come to Indian educational institutions, stay in our hostels and all that, So, we should have actually focused on that instead of this great game. But, it is such a heady portion that if you consume 1 ounce of it, you get inebriated. And then you go on this track of, the geopolitical struggle. We should have, in my opinion, the short point is we should have focused on geoeconomics, because this would have been useful for India's development also, because a symbiotic relationship with Afghanistan is possible, considering its resources, its development needs, and the complementarity with India. And it could have been a gateway for India to Central Asia also. So I think
But this would involve also settling, having a more understanding relationship with Pakistan, as you rightly pointed out.
That understanding is not going to develop now because it is a template of India's domestic politics. Yes. So, a normalization with Pakistan, there is a fundamental contradiction. A normalization with Pakistan, I think, will be undercutting the alchemy of or dissolving the alchemy of the Hindutva ideology.
Exactly.
So if you see what I'm driving at, I don't see a normalization possible, in the present circumstances in this region. But if normalization still takes place, then Afghanistan can be, I don't know. I don't want to, it'll be daydreaming if I were to go on that track. I don't see that normalization taking place. And the zero-sum mindset, I think, is continuing very much there. I get tons of hate mail when I write about it, that, India should have a different approach towards Afghanistan.
Yes.
Nobody was accepting it. Nobody was wanting to believe it when I said that Taliban is going to come to power there. Mm-hmm. Last 1-2 years, I have been saying this repeatedly, and we must prepare for it. Nobody would believe it when I said that there is not the ghost of a chance for a resistance against the Taliban after they came to power in August last month in Kabul. everyone here was elite in jubilation that Panjshir is up in arms. But
Yes.
you know, you really have to have a reality check, Indians. I think this is the
Absolutely. No, I entirely agree. I think that India is itself essentially backed itself into a corner from which it can only lose in the present context. So absolutely. And your judgment, I mean, you said you are going to end on a sad note, but I think the bright part is that there are people like you who are presenting a different perspective, and one hopes that eventually.
Let me give a certain silver lining to this
Absolutely, please.
dim epilogue. The fact of the matter is that some of these things that I have been writing about have also begun appearing in shades of policy. Like, for example, we have had a profound rethink towards Iran. And not in terms of working against Pakistan or what in terms of conspiring to create an anti-Taliban resistance in Afghanistan or anything, but in terms of a meaningful relationship with a country in the neighborhood, which also is similar to India in the kind of passion that it has for its strategic autonomy, and independent foreign policy. So if that develops, I think a number of things will follow out of that, in the sense that we will be distancing ourselves from the Western approaches to Afghanistan, and we will be looking at these things in terms of our interests. Even the attitude towards Afghanistan can change if very cordial, close working relationships are resumed with Iran.
Iran, yes.
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much. On that note, I think we will bring this interview to an end, but I'm sure we will be having lots of opportunities to talk to you again. So thank you very much.